You'll never be good enough. Mom spat at me in front of everyone at my graduation. 2 years later, her boss introduced me as the investor who bought their company. She turned pale and whispered, "That's my daughter." I watched her face turn from surprise to disbelief to something I hadn't seen in her eyes since I was a child: fear. Real, unfiltered fear. The kind that makes your skin go cold. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there in my tailored navy blue suit, silent in my power, letting the moment stretch. Her eyes clung to mine, searching for familiarity in a daughter she hadn't looked at in over 2 years. Her mouth twitched before she spoke, barely audible. "That's my daughter." The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the projector still running in the background. This was the same woman who spat at me, literally spat on me, on the day of my college graduation. She'd marched up to me in front of everyone and hissed, "You'll never be good enough," before turning and walking away like I was some stranger she'd bumped into at a gas station. I remember how the spit landed on my robe, how my stomach sank, how my friends stood frozen, unsure if they'd really seen what they just saw. I remember how it felt to hold my diploma in one hand and a wet tissue in the other, wiping off the last piece of her I ever let myself carry. Now here we were, in the same city, just 2 years and 100 lifetimes later. She didn't recognize my name on the agenda when it was emailed. She hadn't noticed my name on the investor contract either, probably too consumed with saving her job. But here she was, standing in front of the woman she'd tried to break. Her boss had just introduced me as the primary stakeholder who'd acquired majority interest in her company. And all I could do was stare. Not in anger. Not in triumph, just in silence. Because at that moment, I realized something. She still saw me as the child she spit on, but I had become a woman she no longer had the power to define. After my mother's public humiliation at my graduation, I cut off all contact. No calls, no texts, not even a Facebook block, just silence. It wasn't hard. We never had a bond to begin with. She raised me like a soldier raises a cadet, strict, unforgiving, and always one misstep away from being stripped of rank. I grew up in a house where praise was rationed and criticism came in daily doses. My father had left when I was 12, and I never saw him again. I used to think he was a coward, but the older I got, the more I understood he might have just been trying to breathe. After graduating from Drake University, I accepted a job at a local data analytics startup, a risky move according to most people, but it paid off. I worked like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. I poured every ounce of anger, rejection, and quiet desperation into my work. My bosses noticed. Within 6 months, I was handling client portfolios. Within a year, I was negotiating contracts. When the company got acquired, my stock options became seed money for something bigger, my own private equity firm. I kept everything under the radar. No splashy LinkedIn posts, no interviews, just movement. Quiet, consistent, strategic. That's how I stumbled on Harbridge Paper, a relic of a company slowly being bled dry by outdated systems and aging leadership. But I saw its bones. Strong infrastructure, undervalued contracts, and potential for growth if someone had the nerve to clean house. It wasn't until after due diligence was complete and the deal had closed that I reviewed the org chart and saw her name. Margaret Sharp, Senior Operations Manager. My mother. My stomach clenched, but I didn't flinch. This wasn't revenge. This was business. I didn't buy the company to hurt her, but I wouldn't protect her either. For once, she'd stand in front of me on equal footing. And she'd have to reckon with the version of me she refused to believe existed. I requested to be present at the introductory leadership meeting. My team handled everything else. I only had one ask: keep her on the invite list. The conference room on the 14th floor was unassuming, beige walls and dated chairs. The kind of room where people try to act more confident than they feel. I was already seated when she walked in, 5 minutes late as always. She didn't recognize me at first. She sat across the table, rustling papers, eyes focused on the agenda. Dorian, my business partner, did the honors. "This is Noel Sharp," he said. "She's the lead investor and managing partner at Pine Ridge Equity. She'll be guiding the transition." Her head jerked up. Her hand stopped mid-motion. Our eyes met. She blinked. "That's my daughter," she whispered, barely audible, not realizing her mic was still on. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Same sharp jaw, same cold eyes, but older now, smaller. I gave her a polite smile. "Yes," I said calmly, "I'm your daughter. The one who wasn't good enough." The silence that followed was suffocating. Her colleagues shifted awkwardly in their seats. No one knew what to say. She swallowed hard, eyes darting around the room, maybe looking for a way out. But there was none. She looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. I didn't humiliate her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I had already won the only argument that ever mattered. I kept everything professional. Over the next hour, I outlined the transition plan, reviewed the performance metrics, and addressed department goals. Her department, operations, had the worst track record over the last 4 quarters. Late reports, missed KPIs, and internal complaints. She knew it. Everyone in that room knew it. For once, the numbers were on my side. She didn't speak again that day. She just sat there, quiet, shrinking, and I realized something. She didn't fear losing her job. She feared being seen by me in her weakness. Because my existence, my success, meant her narrative had failed. But I wasn't there to punish her. I was there to save a company. Still, the power shift was undeniable. Later that day, after most of the leadership team had cleared out, she approached me in the hallway near the elevators. She looked smaller somehow, her blouse slightly wrinkled, a tension in her jaw she couldn't hide. "You planned this?" she asked quietly. I turned slowly. "No," I said, "but I didn't avoid it either." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I waited, just for a second, then I walked away. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed her anything. Not an explanation, not forgiveness. Nothing. But inside, I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was free. She didn't follow me. I heard the soft ding of the elevator behind me as I walked away, but I didn't turn around. I kept my steps measured, purposeful, controlled, just like I'd trained myself to be. A long time ago, I'd learned that showing emotion around her was like bleeding in shark-infested water. She always smelled it. She always used it. The rest of the week moved fast. My team and I were deep into the restructuring phase, and my calendar was a wall of back-to-back meetings with department heads, vendors, compliance officers, and contractors. But even buried in spreadsheets and budget realignments, I could feel her presence like static in the background, just enough to set your teeth on edge. Margaret kept her head down. She didn't look me in the eye during meetings. She didn't challenge the changes, even when we began reallocating roles and dissolving redundant positions. Her silence was not humility, it was survival. She was watching, waiting, calculating. She'd always been a strategist, just like me. The difference now was I had the authority, and the data, to make the decisions she couldn't argue with. On Thursday morning, I met with HR to finalize performance evaluations for all senior managers. It was standard protocol, but I knew this would be the beginning of the end for her. Her metrics were abysmal: reports late, systems out of date, personnel turnover disproportionately high under her supervision. I didn't have to fire her. I just had to let the truth speak. That same afternoon, I attended a departmental audit presentation. Each division had 20 minutes to present improvement plans. I took notes quietly as the finance team walked us through streamlined forecasting models. I asked targeted questions, nodded where appropriate. When it was time for operations, her department, I could feel the entire room shift. She stepped up to the podium. Her hair was pinned back as it always had been, her blazer crisp. She looked every bit the part of a seasoned manager until she started speaking. Her voice faltered on the first slide. The numbers were messy. Projections didn't align. When she opened it up for questions, even the most lenient of my associates hesitated. I let the silence draw out before speaking. "Margaret," I said, tapping my pen slowly against my notepad, "can you walk us through the updated system migration plan? This slide still references the legacy software." She glanced down, flipping through her printed notes, searching. There was a delay in onboarding the new vendor," she stammered. I raised an eyebrow. "That's not what procurement reported. They said your department never followed up after the initial contract draft. That was 6 weeks ago." She opened her mouth, closed it again. I turned to my CTO. "Please ensure we follow up directly. If operations continue to bottleneck transitions, we'll need to restructure that responsibility." Margaret stood there, still holding the clicker, her face blotchy. She didn't say another word the rest of the meeting. That evening, I stayed late at the office reviewing updated org charts and role evaluations. My assistant, Vanessa, placed a sealed interoffice envelope on my desk around 7 p.m. "From Miss Sharp," she said carefully before leaving. I didn't open it right away. I looked out the window instead, watching the city lights flicker on. Des Moines was quiet this time of night. The streets outside the building were almost empty, except for the occasional car rolling through the intersection. I wondered if she was driving home now, gripping the steering wheel with that same stiff-jawed expression I'd seen for years. Eventually, I opened the envelope. It was a formal resignation letter, 2 paragraphs, dry, impersonal, unsigned. I almost laughed. Even now, she couldn't bring herself to look me in the eye and leave with dignity. The next day, HR confirmed her departure. She packed up her office early in the morning. I wasn't there, I had a site visit across town. But someone said she left without saying goodbye to anyone. Just walked out with a box under her arm and her coat folded over the top. Still, the whispers started quickly. People in the office talked, quietly at first, then more openly, how the investor who just saved the company was Margaret Sharp's estranged daughter, how nobody had seen that coming. Some were sympathetic, others just curious. But none of it mattered. What mattered was what came next. I was now responsible for over 300 employees, dozens of vendor contracts, and the financial legacy of a company that had been around for half a century. The decisions I made weren't just personal anymore, they affected people's jobs, families, and futures. The surreal part? I was good at it. Better than I'd imagined. I spent most of my days buried in logistics and strategic planning, meeting after meeting, call after call. My nights were quiet. No family dinners, no calls from relatives, no soft place to fall at the end of a long day. But I didn't feel lonely. I felt focused. Once or twice, I caught myself wondering where she was, what she was doing. Whether she was angry, humiliated, sad, but I never reached out, and she never called, not even once. Weeks passed. The air inside the Harbridge offices began to shift. Without Margaret looming in the background, department leads stepped up. Ideas flowed more freely. Feedback became constructive instead of combative. People seemed lighter. Operations improved quickly. The new systems we implemented shaved weeks off project timelines, and our first quarterly review showed a 14% increase in profit margins. Investors were pleased. Staff morale lifted. I never mentioned Margaret again. Her name faded from our daily language like old wallpaper peeled from a wall. But then, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I received a phone call. It was from Brenda, the head of recruitment, who also happened to work part-time at the local professional women's networking group in town. "You'll want to hear this," she said, her voice low. "Your mother applied for a mentorship program here. She listed Harbridge as a reference." I felt something twist in my chest, not anger, not pain, something else. That sense you get when life hands you a test you didn't study for, but you've lived the material anyway. "She doesn't know I'm here," Brenda added quickly. But I wanted to check before we responded. "You okay?" I paused. Then I asked her to give me a day before replying. That evening, I sat alone in my office. The sun had dipped just below the skyline, casting a long, golden glow through the windows. I thought about that girl in the graduation robe, the one with spit on her shoulder and heartbreak in her lungs. The girl who stood stunned in front of her peers while the one person who was supposed to cheer her on spat poison at her greatest achievement. I also thought about the woman I had become. Calm, measured, unshakable. I didn't need vengeance. But I did need the truth. So I made a decision. The next day, I personally reached out to the mentorship program. I didn't smear her name. I didn't recount stories of emotional abuse or public humiliation. I didn't even mention the spitting. Instead, I offered a professional, succinct response. Margaret Sharp served as a senior operations manager during a transitional period at Harbridge Paper. While her tenure concluded amicably, our records show significant organizational challenges under her leadership, which required extensive restructuring after her departure. I advise careful review of her management style in the context of collaborative or mentorship-based roles. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't petty. It was honest. I don't know if they accepted her. I didn't ask. I didn't care. I had already reclaimed something far more valuable than reputation. I had reclaimed my voice. Later that week, I received an email from an old professor at Drake University. They were hosting an alumni panel on entrepreneurship and women in leadership. They asked if I'd be willing to speak. I hesitated at first, not because I was unsure, but because part of me wondered if stepping into the spotlight would undo the quiet power I'd worked so hard to cultivate. But then I remembered all the young women who were where I once stood, undervalued, underestimated, and told they'd never be good enough. And I said yes. The night of the event, I stood at the front of a packed lecture hall. I spoke candidly about building something from pain, about carving success from silence, about the difference between proving someone wrong and proving yourself right. And afterward, a girl with wide eyes and shaking hands came up to me and whispered, "My mom always tells me I won't make it either. But after hearing from you, I think I might." I placed my hand gently over hers and smiled. "You will," I said. "And when you do, you won't have to say a word to her. Your life will be the answer." Revenge doesn't always look like fire and fury. Sometimes it's success that doesn't ask for attention. Sometimes it's walking into a room and knowing you belong there, even if the person who raised you said you never would. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to hurt someone to heal. And you don't have to be good enough for them. You only ever have to be good enough for yourself. That's more than enough.